Today, like any other Friday, we're gonna take 5 Calgary Barbell subscribers. We're going to put them up on the screen behind me. I'm gonna critique their technique. We're gonna offer coaching, answer any questions that they might have about powerlifting, progression, programming, any of those things. And as always, Form Check Friday is brought to you by the wonderful, the one and only Bells of Steel. And we'll tell you more about that in a little bit. But first, Dylan, what have we got to start us off, man?
First off, we have Eduardo. He has been trying to get better at managing his center of mass on squats.
Okay.
He's squatted in heels for about 1.5 years because he didn't have the mobility to comfortably squat without them. Recently, he's noticed that anytime he gets to weights above 85% of his 1 RM, he gets tilted forward right as he pushes out of the hole.
See that?
He's tried flats and feels much better connection to the floor and like he can actually feel his center of mass. However, even though he thinks the bar path is pretty straight, he's noticing he seems to swivel out of the hole with his hips shooting up. Eduardo is not sure if this is a bad thing considering the bar path, but historically his squat has a huge sticking point right out of the hole. His 1 rep max is 440 pounds and weights around 385 pounds start feeling super sticky at that point.
Okay. So I want to see from this angle one more time. So we're definitely seeing, I mean, if you look at it from this angle, we're definitely seeing some bar roll, right? Let's watch this second rep one more time here. You can see right there, this little bit of the bar rolling up the back. Generally, when we see the bar roll, we're looking at a couple of things. It's gonna be the upper back tightness. So are we keeping our shoulder blades pinned and pulled down into position, or are we allowing them to kind of break off of and come away from the brace out of the bottom? The other thing we're often looking at is, are our elbows, shoulders, wrists, and everything aligned well throughout the rep? And, you know, if we widen the grip or narrow the grip, are we able to keep that bar a little more still? I think the first place I would go with your squat, Eduardo, is to that upper back. I think that's the component that's kind of throwing us off here. I thought maybe from the side we'd see you setting too far back initially, which oftentimes lifters sit too far back to start off with. The bar kind of comes down and forward, and then we're losing that back position. But you look pretty clean and smooth on the descent, so I think the biggest thing to look at is gonna be upper back. So if you can either widen or narrow the grip, perhaps go from thumbs under to thumbs over, just try to find a way to make sure that as you hit the bottom, your shoulder blades are staying locked into that sort of, into the depression, into being pulled down and back. Make sure that you're trying to engage as much of your upper back as you can, and that the critical moment where you're changing directions in the bottom, we're, again, maintaining that tightness. So I think if you can nail that down, lock that in, I think we're gonna stop seeing that bar moving around on you. As I mentioned earlier, Form Check Friday is brought to you by Bells of Steel. Bells of Steel is a Calgary-based powerlifting and strength training equipment company. They make barbells and plates and lat stacks and selectorized machines and beautiful racks and deadlift jacks and basically anything, you name it, even kettlebells. It's in the name, Bells of Steel. They have distribution in Canada as well as in the States to try to make shipping cheaper and more affordable. And I think maybe my favorite thing, and one of the things that drew us to Bells of Steel initially, is that they take more complex and robust designs that are often very expensive pieces of equipment, like a combination lat pull seated row or a belt squat, and they find ways to make it affordable and shippable and usually reduce the footprint of it so that people can put it into a home gym or a little studio gym like what we've got here. So if I've convinced you, or if I haven't, either way, go ahead and check out Bells of Steel in the description box below. There's a link there, bellsofsteel.com or bellsofsteel.us if you're in the States. Who do we got next, Dill? Looks like a person named James.
Yep. Next up, we have James. James is training for Australian GPC Nationals in late August. His last comp, he failed a 242.5 deadlift due to shoulders and upper back loosening. He has been trying to lower his hips and bring chest up more every week. Where can you see improvement? This is week 3 of the new block.
So, James, I actually think getting your hips lower might be one of the things that's making it hard for you to lock out. I think if we were to take a look at this from the side, we would see that as you pull in and lower your hips down, we are losing a lot of pelvic position, right? So if we looked at your back, if this was your back, right? Head up here, hips down here. I think what we'll see is as you pull in, whoop, we're gonna see this rounding of the lumbar, of the lower back, the lumbar spine. And what we're doing, and you can kind of see it from the front, the hips tilt in underneath you. Generally what's gonna happen there is we're gonna get to the top, we're gonna get the hips into a more or less locked position, but we're gonna have, sorry, I'm not the best illustrator here, we're gonna have still a lot of flexion to try to extend in the low back at the top. So not only is your low back just not as strong at extending, but you're also in some ways kind of taking your hips out of the equation by having that rounded sort of tucked position. So I think by driving your hips low, I think you might actually be making the issue worse because there's more flexion, there's more to make up for at the top. I'm also noticing your belt's quite tight. I think in a lot of cases, overdoing the belt tightness can exacerbate these specific issues because it makes it harder to tell what position your low back is actually in. So what I would like to see is a little less of you driving your knees out, a little more of allowing them to track more or less straight forward. I'd like to see you perhaps toe in a little bit. And I would like to see you try to point your butt towards the wall behind you a little bit, right? So right now, if we look at your low back, we're here. I would like to see you here. So instead of trying to get your hips close to the bar, imagine pointing your hips down and back towards like the wall beneath this electrical socket kind of thing, right? Point your butt back there, almost like you're doing a twerk or something. I think the chest up is probably okay. We might be overdoing it to the point where we're now pulling the pulling the shoulders back, right? We're getting retraction where more or less we just want the depression. So I think you could be, again, kind of shooting yourself in the foot because instead of getting into like a longer position where you're able to grip the bar lower relative to your body, you're actually pulling the shoulder blades back and up by trying to extend your chest so hard. So I would say chest up, not necessarily a bad cue, but let's think long arms. That combined with maybe the slightly looser belt and fixing that pelvis position, I think is gonna really clean up that lockout. Now bear in mind, it might make the start of the lift feel a little harder. That is normal. If it starts to feel tougher off the floor, you'll adapt to that and you will likely have a bit better strength curve and a bit of a smoother lift overall. All right, Dylan, who do we got next?
Next up, we have Anis.
Anis, I think.
Anis is a 66 kilo lifter and feels like they squat with their back.
Okay.
They don't feel like it's the most efficient way of squatting. Happens mostly when they try to sink their squats lower. They would like advice on how to make things more efficient. They're also experiencing some elbow pain in their left elbow from squatting.
All right. So, in terms of the back and squatting with the back, you know, feeling like we're doing more work with the back than we otherwise would be or should be. Most of what I'm seeing here looks pretty good, honestly. I think we might just be kind of adjusting to squatting, right? A little bit of work in the back, not a bad thing. You know, backs is muscles too. If we were to correct something or approach, you know, your squat from that angle, what I would try to say is, number one, don't try to be so upright, right? You have pretty long femurs relative to your torso length, which means we're probably gonna be more comfortable as opposed to squatting like this, more like this, right? Torso angle, probably gonna be comfortable a little more like that, right? A little chest down, or a little more folded, a little more hinged. So I would start with that and just try to work on, as you come out of the bottom of your squat, really try to make sure that those knees stay forward, right? You can see there's a big difference in how we descend and how we come up, right? The knee position being here on the way down versus there on the way up, right? Knees are shooting back, hips are shooting up behind you. You are getting into more of a sort of squat morning pattern. So I think if we fix that, that could go a long ways towards feeling like we're doing more work with the hips and hamstrings and quads and a little less with the back. Now, the other thing I'm noticing is that as we dip into the bottom, we are losing a little bit of back tightness. And the way you're trying to make up for back tightness is by driving your elbows forwards, right? It's a really common thing. I've even heard people cue it, and that's to drive the elbows forwards to keep upper back tightness. Now, what happens there, unfortunately, is that we then see the shoulder blade kind of pop out of position. We start to separate the shoulder from the rest of the brace, where, you know, in the squat, we want to try to keep the shoulder as a part of the brace. We want to try to keep everything super, super locked in. So instead of driving your elbows forwards at the bottom, what I think you should try to do is imagine pulling your elbows in towards this little symbol on your belt, right? Imagine pulling your elbows in towards that, maybe widening your grip a little bit. Sometimes stuffing your grip in really close can make you feel tight, but then it's really hard to maintain it when you're moving. So going a little wider, you might have to do more work to get tight, but in theory, it should allow you to stay tighter, easier, and be more of an active position. So if we can keep the back tighter, the brace is gonna work better. If we can hinge better, we're gonna get more out of the legs. Those two things combined should help a lot with your squat. Who's next, Bill?
Next up, we have Raul.
Raul.
He has recently developed the issue of knees locking early on heavy pulls, and he's not sure how to fix it. If anything comes to mind, he would greatly appreciate it. Thanks in advance, and greetings from Germany.
So I can see what you mean here on the second deadlift. Now, knees locking early, generally, I don't think is an issue, right? I will often coach lifters to try to get their knees to lock early. The issue is your knees lock and your hips are way back. So you end up getting pulled forwards by the bar. So let's see here. I think that if we were to just focus a little bit more on trying to keep the shoulder packed in and keep that bar very, very close to you, you know, thinking about using your lats a little bit more, you know, kind of pulling the bar in up your thighs, especially right around here, right? Right as the bar gets to the sort of midpoint, just past your knees. Really try to think about holding that bar tight against your body, using your lats to kind of pull it down into yourself. And also, another cue that's helped me in the past is to try to pull the bar to you at lockout as opposed to going to the bar, right? So if you can keep that bar close and pull it into you at lockout, even if your knees lock early, you should then be that slight bit more pivoted back onto your heels so that even if the knees lock early, that bar is still in your center of mass. It's still in your center of gravity, and we're not gonna get popped forward like that, because that's all that happened. You've got a really good, really solid looking deadlift. I think that rep just kind of got away from you a little bit. And I think if you cue your lats to keep it a little tighter and focus on really pulling the bar to you as opposed to going to the bar, I think that could help clean that up over a period of practice. And now,
finally, we have Rasmus. He squatted his new 1RM after dealing with intermittent anterior hip pain beyond about 70% of his 1RM.
Okay.
But on some days, like this one, he doesn't feel it. This may have come from increased rehabbing efforts in the past weeks. He has the tendency to good morning squats once it gets heavy. He can hold his back angle more consistently at lighter weights, but from an RPE 8 or so, he has a hard time not extending his knees first before the hips.
Right.
Should he continue to work against it? And if so, what cues and variations should he employ? Is there any reason to believe that his hip pain may be related to this particular movement pattern? He has done pause and pin work for probably a year and improved the movement pattern a bit, but it still looks very pronounced.
Okay, so first things first, I think our grip is a little too tight, right? I think our grip is a little too close. I think that's making it tough for you to get a good upper back position, kind of like I talked about with one of the earlier lifters there. The biggest thing, hold on, let's start from the start. Number one, I think the grip's a little too tight. I think we're bunching everything up to feel tight instead of being active and tightening things up by pulling and activating and tightening and you know, doing active things with the upper back. So I think by doing that, we're not necessarily building the tightest, most stable shelf for the bar to sit on. The next thing that I think happens is this unrack is wild. You're really standing it up with fervor. And I think by doing so, further disconnecting yourself from the bar. The goal of the setup and the unrack is to find a very tight, braced upper back position, then pick up the bar and have that bar just kind of just become a part of your trunk. And when you pick it up really aggressively and the bar kind of wobbles around a little bit, you can see it moving as we walk out there. It's just the connection isn't there, right? So that's the first thing to work on. The second thing is, as we initiate our descent, we go into a whole bunch of extension, right? It looks like we're really trying to drive the chest out. We're really trying to stay super upright. This position can definitely have some interaction with anterior hip pain, right? Because what we're doing is we're tilting the hips back. We're potentially, you know, closing up some of the space there. And yeah, I could see that maybe having something to do with you getting more aggravated in your anterior hip. Do I think that's the reason that it hurts or the reason that it went away? Probably, I don't know, maybe it has a role or it plays a part in that stuff. But usually that's down to load management. I think that if we can fix this brace and like if we look at the position that your trunk's in on the way up, right here, all right, look at how just like flat and straight everything is, right? We're not super arched up. We're not super chest out. Yes, we are tipped forwards. Yes, the knees have come back and the hips have risen a little early, but just focus in here. And that is what we're looking for in the brace. We want to learn to hinge into the squat. We want to learn to pull the ribs down in front and the lats down in back and, you know, create a lot of pressure out into this belt without arching. And then as we initiate the squat, we want to learn to sit back into the hips without arching. Then we want to follow that through to the bottom. And as we come back up, we want to be a little bit patient. So this position, we are pretty disadvantaged from a leverage standpoint. And a lot of times the easiest thing for your body to do is to get those knees a little bit more extended because we'll just do that work with the hips and back. That's not a bad thing either, right? Some lifters, like I was talking about earlier, are gonna be a little more folded over. In your case, I think we can work to be slightly more upright, but it's not gonna come from arching or pulling the chest up. It's gonna come from keeping those knees forward, becoming comfortable with the bottom of the squat, and learning to, like I said, keep the knees forward, push through the front of the feet, and try to really, I like to say, stay in the quads, right? When you do this right, and if you've done pin squats, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. When you do this right and you don't allow your torso angle to change out of the bottom, you are going to feel it in your quads. And probably gonna develop sick looking quads from it as well. But yeah, so I think that combination of things is probably gonna be the trick. Work on your bracing, make sure we get that bar packed into your back, pick it up with control, I'm okay with a little aggression on the unrack, but try not to let it come, become separate from you. Practice your hinge along with the brace like I was talking about. And on the way up, just that little bit of patience. I think pause and pin squats are great. Keep the pin squats in there for sure, because that's a really good way to work on this specific issue with your hips coming up, that squat morning pattern. So yeah, hopefully that helps. Glad to hear that the pain has lessened or dissipated, and hopefully we can help keep you away from that pain in the future. So, all right, everybody, that is Form Check Friday. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you want to submit your lifts, go and check in the description box below. And if you really want to get your lifts checked out by myself and the other fantastic Calgary Barbell coaches, head over to calgarybarbell.com and check out the Calgary Barbell training app, programming, weekly form checks, Discord community. It's all there. Go check it out. Shoutouts to Bells of Steel. Subscribe if you like the content, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.